We have Today we have Rick Berke, co-founder and executive editor at Stat. Um, he is going to be speaking to us about an inside look at how Stat has emerged as the leading journalistic authority on health and medicine. I'm Ken Mandel. I direct the Computational Health Informatics program at Boston Children's Hospital, and we are a 29-year-old multidisciplinary applied research and education program. This series, the Landmark Ideas series, features thought leaders across healthcare, informatics, IT, big science, innovation, and today, journalism. I'm going to introduce Rick Berke, and he'll give a presentation. During that presentation, we'll ask you to put your questions in the Zoom Q&A box as we go, and then we'll have a few closing remarks. I'm really pleased to have with us today Rick, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for several years. He's the co-founder and executive editor of Stat. He moved to Boston in early 2015 as the first employee of Stat, and he was charged with putting the whole thing together. He had previously been at the Baltimore Evening Sun, and from there spent most of his career at the New York Times, where he was chief political correspondent and covered beats including Congress, the White House, and national drug policy. As an editor for many years, he had also leadership roles at the Times. Before launching Stat, he was executive editor at Politico. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rick Berke.
Ken, thanks very much. I'm honored to have the opportunity to join you all and talk about Stat. Your lineup of speakers has been incredibly impressive, and I'm humbled to be among them. I have to warn you, though, that what I warned Ken, which is when he first reached out to me, that unlike all the past speakers, I have no background in health or medicine or science. What I can share with you is the origin story of Stat, whose 8th birthday we celebrated earlier this month, and how, in my humble opinion, we've become the go-to journalism outlet for health and life sciences. We were, of course, a thriving news operation before COVID hit, but our role was transformed in early 2020 when Stat was one of the first news organizations to put their COVID coverage in front of the paywall as a public service. In 2019, we averaged about 1.5 million unique visitors a month to our site. Respectable, but by that was in January, 1.5 million. By that March alone, we had roughly 25 million unique visitors. Tens of millions of readers came to us as a trusted source. We go to the next slide. We never had to ask ourselves whether we should cover COVID or how we should do it. We had a roster of established authoritative reporters who had for years covered biotech, drug and vaccine development, and infectious diseases. In the end, we were nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for our reporting and won many other prestigious awards. Next slide. For us, the wonder of the year since the pandemic hit is that Stat has managed to produce important stories, not only about COVID, but about an expanding range of topics, including AI in medicine, health inequities, hospitals and insurance, FDA approvals, addiction, cancer, and chronic diseases. We've grown to a thriving staff of more than 100, added many new reporting assignments, and sent one of our veteran reporters to London to open our first European bureau. This morning, before any of us were awake, our Europe correspondent, Drew Joseph, published a story on the UK's historic approval of a CRISPR-based medicine. Today, we see ourselves as not another media startup on the scene, but as a well-established and trusted source of news about health, medicine, and the life sciences. If you could go to the next slide now. Stat stands out as a rarity in the modern era of journalism, a successful digital news enterprise. We have a highly influential opinion franchise called First Opinion, where we field as many as 25 unsolicited submissions a day, and robust and video and data journalism. We have 3 podcasts on biotech, opinion, and the intersection of race and medicine. That one is called Color Code. We could go to the next slide. More than, and you can go through a couple of these slides as I'm talking. More than half of our stories are behind the paywall of Stat Plus, for which our readers or their employees buy individual or group subscriptions. By building a revenue model that relies more on subscribers than advertisers, we can operate more freely from the ups and downs of the economy or the whims of companies, or the whims of companies or institutions that don't care for our coverage of them. We have free newsletters from our flagship morning rounds to the readout on biotech to health tech to DC diagnosis. And you could go to the next slide. We've also built a highly successful events arm. Our Stat Summits in Boston and other cities bring newsmakers, researchers, executives, and patients together with journalists to discuss breakthroughs and the latest issues in health and medicine. We've also built a successful clinical intelligence data platform so users can get real-time updates on new drug trials across the globe. Stats Trials Pulse is an AI-assisted tool that monitors millions of changes in the government clinical trials database to surface patterns and trends in real time. We also have data trackers that are popular with our readers. A generative AI tracker, a weight loss drug tracker, a breakthrough device tracker. You can go to the next slide. We have special programs that are intended to engage our community of readers. These are on the screen, these are our newsletters. Today, we are asking for entries for our 8th annual Stat Madness, a bracket-style competition that honors the best innovation in research and identifies the top discoveries in biomedicine. Boston Children's has long been an impressive competitor. I also want to mention our annual Stat Wonderkins feature, in which we celebrate the unheralded heroes of science and medicine. We pour over hundreds of nominations from across North America in search of the next generation of scientific superstars. We have the status list now in its 3rd year, in which we recognize both well-known leaders and influencers in areas like biotechnology and public health, as well as largely unheralded heroes. All have compelling stories to tell. For our most devoted Stat Plus readers, we've just recently started a new service called Stat Plus Connect. It's an online meeting place for Stat Plus subscribers to engage in discussions with one another and with Stat journalists, participate in regular chat groups and community-centric online events, take online courses, and register for community programs. Let me now turn to a short video that gives you a little bit of a taste of some of the stories we've tackled. Thanks. I'm guessing you didn't hear the sound. And if you didn't, trust me, we had a lively soundtrack, and the experience would have been much better. But you get the sense of what STAT is and what we do. So let me now let's go to the next slide. Who are our readers? Our most passionate readers are people who work in health and medicine or related fields, whether in biopharma, at hospitals, academia, technology, government, nonprofits, financial services, and media. We have a sophisticated audience, so we don't talk down to them, yet we want our readers to learn something from our STAT story. And we believe that our journalism should strive to be provocative and interesting, as well as always authoritative. Why don't we go to the next slide? The CHIP audience here today is also the STAT audience. I know how, and here you're seeing today's homepage right now. I know how your discoveries and innovations have transformed the world of big data in healthcare, the use of AI in clinical decision-making, and the IT strategies of commercial enterprises. Your work has been widely adopted by major technology companies. So I don't need to tell you that this is an incredibly important moment. As technology gets more powerful, we of course want AI and informatics tools to help people and improve their health. We have to take care, though, not to let the behemoth companies that control these tools further their own interests at the expense of the people they're supposed to be serving. And that philosophy has informed our coverage at STAT. One of our most important growth areas has been in reporting on health and technology. We have a half dozen reporters covering these issues. Let's go to the next slide. Our reporter, Casey Ross, has led the way for us. In 2022, he forged a partnership with MIT in which we conducted a novel experiment that uncovered flaws in popular AI algorithms that guide care for millions of hospitalized patients. Let's go to the next slide now. The findings were particularly devastating for a product designed to warn of life-threatening sepsis, leading Epic Systems to re-engineer its tool. Let's go to the next slide. On the next one, I'm afraid we're a little out of order. So why don't we go back to the mission. Yeah, let's just stay there. Just this week, we published an investigation by Casey and Bob Herman that documents how the use of our artificial intelligence is driving denials of claims or delaying treatment for seriously ill patients. I could go on and on about our journalism and the stories behind the stories, but before I get ahead of myself and go into all that, let me share the story of how STAT came to be in the first place. This was the dream of John Henry, known, of course, for owning the Red Sox and the Liverpool soccer team. He also owns the Boston Globe. John was at a small dinner in Boston in the summer of 2014 when Eric Schmidt, the head of Google, the topic was how Boston, despite its many advances in tech, had been eclipsed in the field by Silicon Valley. The talk turned to how Boston was now the world epicenter of medicine, biomedical research, and life sciences. John did not want to see this city eclipsed again like it had been with tech. Immediately after that dinner, John decided that this region, so rich with some of the world's, as you know, some of the world's best teaching hospitals, leading research institutions, and so many Nobel laureates, deserved more attention than even a respected newspaper like the Globe could give it. He wanted to create a digital publication with a national and international reach, based in Boston, but eventually with reporters around the world. It would be an experiment to see whether he could create a business model that would make best-in-class journalism financially sustainable. John approached me, and this was in late 2014, with the idea of creating this news organization. We would be an independent news company, but also a sister publication of the Globe. The Globe could run our content, and we could run theirs. The Globe and Stat now have, or all along, have had separate staffs of reporters and editors and separate business operations, but on occasion we do collaborate. At first, this didn't seem like a logical fit, kind of like being here today. I had been an editor and reporter at the New York Times, as Ken said, for nearly 3 decades, mostly in Washington, covering politics and presidents. Then I was the editor of Politico. And here was John Henry asking me to move from DC to Boston to build a startup about medicine and science. I can now confess that when he was talking passionately to me about CRISPR monkeys, I nodded enthusiastically, but I had no idea what he was talking about. Still, I did grasp that John may have been onto something. I traveled to Boston, talked to clinicians, researchers, and scientists. I quickly realized the treasure trove that was here, that countless stories weren't being told. And I realized what an opportunity for journalists to build a newsroom from the ground up, covering a subject that touches every living person. So I arrived in Boston on a cold winter day more than 8 years ago. They gave me a laptop and a big, lonely office in the Globe building, then in Dorchester. From there, I started hiring people from around the country and Canada, many of the most respected reporters and best editors anywhere, who had already made their names covering public health, science, patients, and the business and politics behind health and medicine. We also hired many promising colleagues who were right out of college, journalistic wonderkins, you might say. We came up with the name STAT, which carries an immediacy and a medical connotation, which I hope all of you appreciate. And we officially launched the site in November 2015. We tried to fill a void in journalism about medicine and science. We know you already have a tidal wave of information coming at you every day. There are prestigious journals like the New England Journal of Medicine. There are countless trade and business publications on every specialty. There are publications like Medscape that many of you read, as well as sites like WebMD that appeal to the masses. There are respected publications like the New Yorker, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. They weigh in brilliantly on many of these topics. What sets STAT apart is that none of these publications combines the everyday consistency of coverage, deep and authoritative reporting, and engaging reading that you can find in STAT. Our mission is to take readers into the world of medicine and life sciences and to try to give them a sense of what goes on here. The inspiring successes, the failures, the ethical debates, the challenges. We tell the stories of you and your patients and give voice to issues that often get too little attention. We write about medical education and the challenges at teaching hospitals and experiences of residents. As our mission statement, as you see, says, we take readers inside hospitals, science labs, biotech boardrooms, and political backrooms. We dissect crucial discoveries. We examine controversies and puncture hype, and we hold individuals and institutions accountable. From the start, we considered the Longwood medical area and Kendall Square as ground zero for our coverage. I don't have to tell you that Longwood is probably the densest, most thriving, most innovative medical community in the world. This area accounts for billions of dollars in federal research money every year and some of the most stunning medical advances. Our challenge has been deciding what not to cover. There's so much. We're a rare publication that hired a reporter just to cover cancer. But as you know, we could have 5 reporters covering cancer and we wouldn't run out of stories to write about. We try to capture the big discoveries, but also the more personal stories about practitioners and patients. Beyond Boston, we have reporters around the country and in Europe. We look for stories that are most interesting, topical, and that no one else is doing. There's no magic formula for how we come up with stories. Sometimes our reporters or editors will be reading an obscure study and find an angle that intrigues them. Or our reporters will talk to people they trust in medicine who they might tell them something that seems fresh and compelling. Sometimes readers reach out to us with ideas. Our stories are long, they're short. We tell them through words, through video, motion graphics, and whatever creative ways we can to make these complicated subjects understandable. Let me give you some specifics. On the day we launched, well before anyone knew Donald Trump would get the Republican nomination, we published an investigative story on Trump's sham vitamin business. We later wrote the first in-depth interview with Trump's physician, Howard Bornstein. Next slide, please. Another totally different story early on was in June 2016 when we wrote about an extraordinary patient at Boston Children's who was born with about 20% of his brain outside his skull. And you see the story was that there was a video with it saving Bentley's brain. His patients and doctors spent time with our reporter and video team and showed us how they had to figure out a way using 3D printing of models to save the important bits of his brain and gently position it back inside his skull. Let's go to the next slide. Some of you may also remember another big project we did with Boston Children's in 2019. A group of stat reporters and editors met Holly and Eric High during a visit to the hospital. The Highs experienced the unthinkable horror of their 4-month-old baby, James, not waking up from a nap. Their anguish didn't end there. It was compounded by investigators from 4 different agencies who made the Highs feel they were to blame, though there was no evidence of wrongdoing. While the point of such inquiries is to protect babies from abuse, our reporting found that parents already mourning the loss of their infants often face the misconception that a sudden infant death must be the result of abuse or carelessness. Our reporter, Eric Budman, wrote sensitively about the plight of the Highs and other families, and how we also found that unexplained infant deaths have not decreased as much as many believe. The numbers seem smaller than they are because of wide confusion over how medical examiners classify these deaths. I also want to mention the hugely impactful reporting we did on Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family's culpability in the opioid epidemic. Long before Richard Sackler became a household name and the face of corporate greed on the Hulu series Dope Sick, a reporter at Stat heard about a hidden cache of Purdue documents filed under seal in a remote courthouse in Kentucky. They included boxes of emails and other internal company records, and notably a deposition by the ultra-secretive Sackler. The only time a member of the family that founded Purdue had been questioned under oath about the family's role in the illegal marketing of OxyContin. We filed a motion to unseal in 2016. Stat was a startup launched just a few months earlier, and our legal counsel warned us that the legal odds were against us and the case would cost us tens of thousands of dollars. Even if we prevailed, Purdue had endless cash and would appeal and drag out the litigation as long as it could. I went to John Henry early on. I said, do we want to be doing this? And this is the beauty of having a generous owner who cares about the journalism and the mission. He said, go for it. So we went ahead with this. And as John said, pursuing these sorts of stories is why we started Stat in the first place. A lower court judge quickly ruled in our favor, but as predicted, Purdue stalled the release of records for more than 3.5 years. In the meantime, our reporter David Armstrong, by then working for ProPublica, obtained the Sackler deposition through other means in 2019, and it was jointly published by Stat and ProPublica. Among other things, it showed that Sackler had endorsed a plan to conceal OxyContin's strength from doctors. We published more than 20 stories on the Sacklers. The reporting by Stat exposed Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family's direct role in accelerating the opioid crisis. The revelations fueled the drive to strip the Sackler name from museum wings, university buildings, and require family members to pay billions to compensate victims and assist communities in combating the continuing opioid scourge. More recently, let me just give you a sampling of some of the other stories we've covered. We had a 2-year investigation that disclosed more than 1,000 incarcerated people died from Hep C-related complications in the 6 years after a curative drug became available, because prisons erected barriers to treatment with the pricey pills. We also endeavored to document, and if you go to the next slide, to document how structural racism is a colossal problem within medicine. But because it is so deeply entrenched and often invisible, it is rarely examined or challenged. In 3 years of stories and investigations, Stat made the invisible visible. Among other things, our reporting showed how new Black doctors, and you go to the next slide, are quietly pushed out of residency training programs at alarming rates, and how pulse oximeters give inaccurate readings and keep some darker skinned patients from getting needed care. We showed how Hispanic people are excluded from clinical trials and how decades-old recommendations to eliminate health disparities were largely ignored by medical leaders. Now, this next slide is about, is one of many stories we've done all year on obesity. We focused much of our reporting firepower all year long on Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, and now Zepbound, a new generation of weight loss inducing drugs that's transforming patients' lives, dividing medical experts, reshaping our concepts of health, and spurring the biggest business battle in years. In advance of the clinical trial results that would show if these GLP-1 drugs also benefited the heart, Stat launched the Obesity Revolution, a series examining the rise of the drugs and their implications for society. Our coverage included the most comprehensive overview of the obesity revolution, an exclusive look at the tactics by Ozempic's maker Novo Nordisk, a spellbinding tale of the science showing these drugs act as much on the brain as on the gut, and a profile of an 9-year-old girl who epitomizes the complexity and humanity of the country's obesity crisis. And on the screen here, you see, this is one of our most popular stories in the series, how it's about cravings, how the new weight loss drugs are revolutionizing our understanding of desire. And it says, the headline is, you see, food cravings could be just the beginning. Next slide. We've also written a great deal about how academia is in the midst of here we have before we get to the next thing, this is, I mentioned earlier, our trackers. This is our AI tracker. We do obesity trackers. We have all kinds of trackers that are very popular that help our readers sort out everything from drug development to AI in health systems. Now, academia, as I was saying, is in the midst of an unprecedented exodus of life science researchers, many of whom are leaving for lucrative jobs in the private sector. Next slide. And here we have a story that we just ran yesterday that we wrote about how this exodus is already having a detrimental impact on basic research, slowing the pace of scientific progress. Faculty struggling to recruit and retain researchers spoke openly to our reporter, Jonathan Wozen, about promising hypotheses going forward, untested, grant dollars sitting unused, millions of dollars, and projects languishing in limbo for months to years. Today, we're going all out and are covering the CRISPR news, which I mentioned earlier. In the last decade, as you know, there's been extensive reporting on a high-profile patent fight over who controls the rights to the genome editing technology. Earlier this year, we reported on a new, previously unreported fight quietly brewing between top labs and billion-dollar companies over a new generation of editing technologies that could be more important for medicine and even more lucrative. Our reporting blended a detailed understanding of the incredibly complex biology underlying these inventions with a nuanced grasp of the dense intellectual property laws that govern what constitutes a patentable invention in biotech and how a new company might be able to copy that invention but still get away with it. In another line of topical coverage, we've written many profiles from around the country that are eye-opening snapshots from a post-Roe America. We endeavored to bring added value to a story that is well covered by other media companies. Reproductive health experts see patient stories as the single most important tool to deepen Americans' understanding of the Dobbs decision and its aftermath, but they are often unwilling or unable to help bring such stories to light. We were undeterred with our reporters carefully building trust with patient community leaders, people who've had abortions themselves and had since become peer supporters. We continue, of course, to write about the many reverberations from the pandemic. Our investigation from our Washington bureau revealed that while the federal government set aside more than $1 billion to study long COVID, there's basically nothing to show of it. As of April, the National Institutes of Health hadn't signed up a single patient to test any potential treatments. Instead, the NIH spent the majority of its money on broader observational research that won't directly bring relief to patients. That innovation early on raised question in Congress with several powerful Democratic lawmakers interrogating the NIH over its slow progress, citing our coverage. Now, let me go to the next slide. And before I conclude here and take your questions, I want to circle back to this week and mention an investigation we published on Tuesday that's drawing a tremendous attention all week long. And it's one of the most important projects we've ever undertaken. All year, our reporters have documented how the use of artificial intelligence is driving denial of claims or delaying treatment for seriously ill patients. But this story that you see on the screen that we did this week goes even deeper, establishing how denials of claim were by design. We reveal that the nation's largest health insurance company, United Health, pursued a strategy to pressure its medical staff to cut off payments for seriously ill patients in lockstep with the computer algorithms calculations, denying rehabilitation care for older and disabled Americans as profits soared. 3 former case managers told us that the personal stories behind the algorithmic denials were haunting. In one instance, an older woman found in the laundry room by her grandson after a stroke, her right side paralyzed, was allotted 20 days of rehab by the algorithm, when the average for severely impaired stroke patients is almost double that. These are, when I talk about our writing stories that touch every human being, that's what we're trying to do here. These are stories that touch us all. Hours after the story was published on Tuesday, a class action lawsuit was filed against United Health Group and a subsidiary, citing our story, alleging that they're illegally using the algorithm to deny rehabilitation care to seriously ill patients, even though the companies knew the algorithm has a high error rate. The story about United Health is a cautionary sign as businesses and as our culture are increasingly infatuated with data-driven decision-making. Reporters Casey Ross and Bob Herman write that in healthcare, less sophisticated technology is already threatening basic human safety. Algorithms and AI tools are being empowered to help make consequential decisions about the treatment of patients who have a limited understanding of these products. The next slide, please. I know you all understand the value and possibilities of these new tools and hope you agree there needs to be transparency into how these tools are configured, what data are fed into them, and how they're being applied to make decisions about patients. We cannot be asked to simply trust the decisions made behind the corporate wall, or the corporate veil, rather. With that, I really appreciate your listening to all my tales of stat and our coverage and our mission. And I look forward to any questions you might have. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Rick, again, seeing all this in one place, hearing it in one place and in a short period of time really highlights for me the achievements that have been obvious but are still incredibly impressive to hear about this emergence from a standing high jump when you got here in 2015. So it seems to me that that you touched on, I think, in some ways, with a lot of justified pride on stories that were really investigative and that revealed problems in the way healthcare is being managed at a very broad system level. A little bit like, maybe some of them had almost, a spotlight, globe spotlight like flavor, where the impact can be very large. To what extent is that kind of almost, I don't want to use it in a negative way, but almost a policing function, an investigative journalistic function where, there has to be an observer, a reporter, editor relationship to actually really document what's happening and to uncover patterns that might not be there. To what fraction of your efforts do you think are kind of come under that category of really being an important monitor, regulator, in a sense, not regulator in terms of formal regulation, but, a regulator on the forward motion of the healthcare system to make sure it's going in the right direction?
That's a great question, Ken. I haven't really ever thought of sort of what portion exactly, but I would say that as sort of I mentioned when I talked about Purdue and sort of our origins from the very beginning, we thought it was and we said this in our mission statement at the very beginning, we see the watchdog function as very important. And I would say we don't separate necessarily investigative reporters versus other reporters. Every reporter at Stat, to varying degrees, strives to go deeply and understand the subject they're covering. And as you all know better than I do, these are enormously complicated subjects, like the story about like understanding this algorithm at United Health and understanding how that works, and Medicare Advantage, and how it's enormously like mind-numbing. And so our reporters, I remember Casey Ross telling me he was reading books about AI and health tech and learning the field, going to seminars. It takes a real investment for our reporters to understand these really complicated stories, the CRISPR stories. So what I would say is this kind of watchdog coverage, we never think about like we're going after X. We don't think of it that way. We think about people, what patients, what our readers need to know that they're not being told, and where does journalism take us? And we try to be as fair-minded as possible in all of our coverage of all these areas. We always ask, whether it's a company or an institution or whatever, we ask all the important questions. Explain to us what are we missing here? Our investigative stories, and I think the reason why there was a vacuum, I think, in this sort of coverage is it takes, first of all, very skilled reporters to know how to do this sort of coverage, and you have to understand the subject matter, and you have to have a resource commitment to finance this kind of coverage. And the other thing I'll just say very bluntly is that we don't ever pull any punches, and that sometimes can cost us over the years advertisers. They'll say, we don't like we're not going to write the nice like PR story. We'll write positive stories when they're deserved. We'll be the first to write about great, exciting new innovations. When I talk about our wonderkins and our stat madness, we celebrate science and health discoveries and what happened with the vaccines and so forth. But we'll also be the first to say, this is something you should know that's going on.
So this denial story is, particularly relevant to the modern era, because it's very clear that the organizations that have the most dollars to put into AI solutions will be potentially the ones most interested in reducing costs, and not necessarily according to sort of humanistic and ethical principles that might be what we believe should be driving medicine. Indeed, I was actually at a Senate subcommittee hearing of the Help Committee last week on AI, and one of the other witnesses was presenting on this exact topic, denials. And there's also AI to submit prior authorizations for the healthcare system, but probably the folks funding the denials have more dollars to put towards their software than the folks trying to get the prior auths. And so this is a great example, but and it's one very narrow use case, but also very widely applicable. Do you have a sense of how you will look for the others? Because these will be everywhere. How will your reporters start to figure out this is going to be so pervasive? What do you have a sense will be the most important stories in the kind of AI business world?
Well, I would say this story alone, we've written several stories along these lines, more than beyond this year, earlier than this year. Casey's been on this for years, and he and another reporter early on wrote about, do you remember the whole IBM Watson for cancer debacle? And we wrote about how that was largely smoke and mirrors. That needed to be said, and we wrote about that. This story this week, I recommend it to everyone. It goes into detail. One of the most telling things is they're following a philosophy pioneered by Toyota about how to cut costs, corporate costs. These are patients. These are people in nursing homes who could be affected. Sure, there's a lot of waste in health, but you got to think of the patient and the person. The question about what the next the next stories would be, it's better put to Casey and Bob Herman, because they get a lot of they're living this world and reporting out the examples as best they can. We're hoping what we found that our reporting on this begats other report, like people see our stories and they reach out often directly. We've gotten a huge sort of response to this week's story. And people reach out and say, "Did you know about X?" And as an example, the story this week, like it captures how United Health wanted to keep the algorithm, like the variance, no more than 1% from their algorithm. We didn't know that when we first were writing about this. People ended up sharing that with us. So we learn more as we report out the story, and we hear from various people.
Great. Let me go to a couple of questions from the Q&A, and if folks have more, put them in the Q&A. So here's a broad one, but one that I'm sure you're starting to think about as we come up on December. What are your goals or priorities for coverage areas in 2024?
We have when you talk, Ken, about investigations, we have several investigations related to. I don't want to reveal them because of our reporters, but we have on many deep, game-changing stories that are underway on a variety of topics. And I'm sorry to sound vague, but I'm very excited about sort of what we have lined up. I'm also in all these coverage areas that we're doing, like certainly with the election and politics coming up, where our Washington and policy and politics reporters are certainly focused on not the horse race and the stories everyone is doing, but what we need to know about policy and drug pricing and the impacts that are out there. Where our reporters have lists of stories. I could ask any of our reporters on chronic disease coverage. What are we doing with that? What are we doing with addiction? What are we doing with health tech? What are we doing with? We have all kinds of the CRISPR decision today is leading to a bunch of stories that we're working on today and henceforth. So I could go on and on about sort of dozens of things that are in the works.
Here's a provocative question. What are some of the most significant bridges you've burned, and how do you deal with that?
I love a provocative question because I expect that from our reporters, but I expect the question directed at me too. So bridges we burned. I have to be careful. I tend to sort of say more than I should, but let me just say what I found is that when people, there have been times I don't feel comfortable saying who's pulled advertising, but I can say that people we've written about very critically, fairly but critically, have come back at us and sponsored events or advertised. For instance, I just mentioned IBM Watson. Like, they disbanded that big program, but then they are advertising with us because they want to reach our audience. And often the new people that come in say, "Thank you for cleaning this up, helping us clean this mess up. We didn't like what was going on." We had Purdue Pharma was advertising with us. Believe it or not, they're trying to, like, here we reveal this what they were tragically doing, but they're trying to reestablish themselves. We'll take their money if that's what they want to do. We're not pulling any punches. We never have. We never will. But what I love is when people. What I love is seeing when bridges are burned, but not forever. And what I strive for with STAT, what we all strive for at STAT is people don't always like what we cover, and don't but they want to read us, and I want them to respect what we do. They might not agree with us, they may not like what we do, but we want them to know that we're fair, we're meticulous, and we're not out to get anyone. We're out to do good journalism that's important to our readers.
Great answer. You seem to the bridges come back like the phoenix, and that's
we always hope they do.
That's very nice to hear, and it speaks to the importance of STAT in the ecosystem. Here's a very specific question. Have you considered a story on long-term care facility staffing and the CMS staffing requirements and regulations? Hot topic.
I don't. I mean, that's an important topic. I don't know specifically. I don't know. I can't say if that's on the list or not, but that's important. And feel free to, reach out to my email is on the site, rick.berke@statnews.com. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any ideas I can pass along to my colleagues.
It is, I think, a great topic for a story. So when we see it run, we'll beam with pride here at the Landmark Idea series. So, Rick, this has been just a terrific conversation, and thank you for being so candid about your priorities and a little bit about how you make the magic happen. Yes, Rick.
And can I just mention one thing? I saw somewhere in there someone asking. There was someone early on said, "I've never heard of STAT before."
Yeah.
And I wanted to just address that because in some ways that pains me because we've been around for 8 years and tens of millions of people have read us. But in other ways, I see that as an opportunity. And because I feel very deeply that we do important work and more people should read us and share what we do. And I just want to make and there was also, I think in that same note, something like you're awfully expensive or whatever. And I just want to say that just as a little marketing plug, we do lots of groups with institutions. I think Boston Children's might have a group, like, I don't know, I can't remember, but we have academic discounts, we have all kinds of things. And journalism costs, these stories I'm talking about cost millions and millions of dollars a year to produce. We're not making a big profit here. We're pouring, the Henrys are letting us pour the money back into expanding our journalism. So I really would be grateful for people to just think for a minute about, in any way you can, read our stories. Our Stat Plus subscriptions are our biggest, most readable, sort of exclusive investigations, like this AI investigation this week, the story about academia yesterday. We have as many as like a dozen stories a day. We have lots of content. So I just really encourage you who haven't read STAT or don't know about STAT, just take a look, get our free newsletters, see what we're up to.
Fantastic. And Rick, on that note, I will thank you. I hope we can have you back again sometime. We have heard from other of your reporters here in multiple events, and we always love interacting with STAT. So thank you so much. And I'm just going to put up a slide and remind people of what the upcoming Landmark Ideas seminars. We have 4 on the books. Thomas Mayer coming next month. Actually, in just a couple of weeks, he's the medical director at the NFL Players Association, a fantastic microcosm of the health system where the safety of players has been advanced tremendously under his leadership. Marianne Brody, who directs public opinion and survey research for the Kaiser Family Foundation. You might not know her name, but you know her work. It's in many of the publications that you read. Toby Cosgrove, a storied CEO of the Cleveland Clinic, who's going to share his long historical view of the healthcare system. And Christina Farr, who is a former health reporter for CNBC, very simpatico with a lot of the stat reporting, and now a health tech investor. And she's going to have a fireside chat looking at this overlap between the skill sets needed for these 2 professions. You can register at chip.org/events. And please also reach out to us at chip.org. We have a lot of research, training, education here for you to engage with us in here at Boston Children's Hospital. So thank you all very, very much.
Ken, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Rick.